The sky turned red as the first scream tore through the valley. The alien village had no warning, no protection, no chance. They were a peaceful race. Simple, quiet lovers of music and farming, not warriors, not fighters. And when the black ships came down from the clouds, they did not even know they were enemies until their homes were burning, and their elders were screaming. The attackers were tall, scaled things with metal claws and glowing red eyes, and they moved like shadows ripping through the village like fire through dry grass. The planetary government sent a signal, saying hold on, help is coming, but help never came. Instead, the skies went silent, and the only thing left was the sound of bones cracking and children crying. The villagers huddled in the temple hoping for a miracle, but they had never believed in miracles. Until now, one of them, a young mother named Elia, held her daughter close, hiding beneath shattered stone. She whispered for her to stay quiet, for her to be brave, for her to not scream even as blood dripped through the cracks above them. Her brother Gino crawled through the rubble looking for others to save, and with each scream he flinched, but kept moving. His hands were shaking, but he carried a small broken transmitter, something ancient barely working, and he had no idea who would hear him. But he activated it anyway. Please, we are dying. Please, someone help us. We are not soldiers. We are not dangerous. We are just a village. He repeated the message again and again and again as the screams grew fewer and the air smelled like smoke and flesh. Far away on the edge of a forgotten star system, deep within a battered human warship, floating in silence, a blinking red light flashed on a rusty screen. The human sitting there was an old man with one arm missing and a face full of scars. His name was Briggs, and he had been called many things: murderer, monster, freak, soldier, killer. He looked at the message, playing in broken static, and his one eye narrowed. He lit a cigarette and leaned forward, then called out to the others who got a cal across the ship. For other humans stepped into the room, each of them looking like they had walked through 100 battles, one with burns down his neck, another with cybernetic legs, one woman with a tattoo of a skull across her cheek and eyes that burned like steel. Briggs pointed to the message, aliens asking for help. The youngest of them, a tall, dark-haired man named Reno, tilted his head. Oh, they know what we are. Briggs grinned without smiling. Nopath woman crossed her arms. And we going anyway. Briggs looked back at the screen and whispered, nobody else will. They suited up, loaded weapons, checked engines. The ship groaned like a dying beast, but it moved, it obeyed, and within hours it dropped from the stars like a falling god back on the planet. The enemy laughed around fires dancing over alien corpses, tearing apart what was left of the village. They had no fear. They believed the planet was theirs and that the galaxy had forgotten these people. But then the wind changed and the fires flickered, and something moved in the shadow zone of the enemy. Soldiers turned and squinted into the darkness. You hear that? Another stood holding a severed horn from a villager, laughing. Here, what? A third started to speak, but never finished. Something sliced through the air and took his head clean off. Panic erupted, but it was too late. The forest exploded with motion, and the humans came out like ghosts wearing mismatched armor marked with blood and battle. Each step they took was silent, each movement precise, and when they struck it was without mercy. The first squad of enemies fell before they understood what was happening, and the others turned to run, but the trees were already closing in. Briggs moved like a beast, ripping one enemy apart with his bare hand. Reno fired a long black rifle that hummed like thunder. The woman with the skull tattoo tossed a blade through the air, and it landed in the heart of a fleeing captain. Gino peeked from the ruins holding his sister and watched in silence. Said, they are monsters. Elia held her daughter tighter. They are humans, made no speech, gave no warning. They simply killed until there was silence again. Then Briggs stood in the center of the firelight looking at the terrified villagers and slowly removed his helmet. His face was half metal, half scar. Came because no one else would. The villagers said nothing. Stay if you want us. Hostile. No one moved, but then the children came forward first, not afraid, and one tiny boy walked up to Briggs and touched his metal armor. You going to hurt us? Briggs knelt and said softly, if you try to hurt them again, and pointed back at the enemy corpse. That night no one slept, not the villagers, not the humans, and in the distance more enemy ships circled, preparing for war, unaware that something worse than them had just arrived and was waiting in the dark. The forest was thick with smoke and silence, broken only by the distant cries of wounded enemies dragging themselves away from the village. They once thought weak. The stars above were still glowing, but now they looked down on a different world, one where killers had become protectors and fear had found a new face. The humans moved like shadows among the trees, never resting, never stopping, their eyes always watching, their hands always ready. The villagers stayed back, still unsure what to think, unsure if they were truly safe or just caught between two nightmares. In the morning the humans came into the village, their armor stained with blood, their weapons dragging on the ground behind them, but their steps were calm. Their voices quiet. Briggs led them forward, his metal arm gleaming. In the weak sunlight he stopped near the center of the ruined village, and looked around, not with pity, not with pride, just understanding. Build defenses, he said to no one, and everyone at the villagers exchanged glances. Some nodded, others backed away, holding their children closer. Reno dropped a box of old tools and tech salvaged from the enemy. We'll show you how to fight. If you want to live, you need to become more than you are. The alien elders looked shaken. One of them stepped forward, an old woman with silver scales on her face. She asked softly, do you help us? What do you gain? Briggs looked at her for a long time, then turned and pointed at a group of children playing in the rubble. They remind me of someone, and he walked away. Training began that day. The humans showed them how to hold weapons, how to move, how to hide, how to survive. They did not teach honor, they did not speak of glory, they taught pain and speed and death. Because that is what the enemy understood, and that is what would be needed to survive. Villager, a young male named Taro, asked Reno. During a break, do people call you killers? Reno was quiet for a moment, then answered without looking up, because we just choose where to aim. The village changed quickly. The weak were taught to be strong, the children learned how to signal danger. The elders watched the skies, the humans taught them to dig traps, to sharpen sticks, to use the land as a weapon. But the fear never fully left. Some nights the villagers whispered to each other about the humans, saying they were demons, or cursed that they drank blood, or felt no pain. But then the same humans would stand guard all night while the villagers slept, and bring back stolen food from enemy camps and bury the fallen with their own hands. At night, after a long day of training, Briggs sat alone by the fire, and his small girl approached him. She had no parents left and no name anymore. She just called herself Leaf, because that was all she remembered. Edge sat beside Briggs and watched the fire. Are you sad? She asked. Briggs nodded. One siesto. You miss your family? Never had. One tilted her head then. Why do you fight for us? Briggs stared at the fire and answered slowly. Because I was made to fight, and this is the first time it felt right. Elsewhere in the forest, a squad of enemy scouts moved quietly. They had been sent to report on the strange new threat, and what they found made their blood run cold. The village was no longer afraid, it was alive with motion. The traps hidden and deadly, the pots confusing and full of ice. They returned to their commander trembling. They have devils on their side. We cannot win this with numbers, the commander snarled. Then we use fire and machines, and no mercy. The enemy began preparing something darker. Back at the village, the humans sensed the change in the air. Reno climbed a tower and stared at the horizon. They are coming. Briggs gathered everyone together, his voice calm but firm. This will not be like last time. They will bring real weapons and real hate. We have to be faster and harder. Earth villagers stood around listening, some terrified, some ready. One elder said, we're not you, we are not killers. Briggs stepped close to him and whispered, then you better pray the ones who are stay on your cities. The sun fell. The humans moved through the trees, setting traps, placing explosives, drawing maps on dirt floors, showing the villagers where to stand, where to hide, where to run. The forest became a fortress, and the night became their shield. When the enemy came, they came with fire. They dropped burning orbs into the trees and sent machines rolling forward, covered in armor the size of house. But the humans were waiting. Greeno triggered a trap, and the first machine fell into a pit lined with spikes. Another was crushed by a tree pulled by ropes. A third exploded from beneath, where the villagers had buried old fuel cells. Briggs led the charge into the flames, moving like death itself, his metal arm smashing skulls, his knife cutting through the air like lightning. The villagers followed, screaming, now not in fear, but rage. They fought beside the humans, shoulder to shoulder, and for the first time, they felt powerfully. Stood behind a wall holding a small blade, and when an enemy came for her, she struck with all her might and survived. When the battle ended, the fire still burned, but the village still stood. The villagers looked at the humans, covered in blood, breathing hard and standing talent. They no longer called them monsters. They called them hope. The smell of burned metal and ash clung to the air as the villagers worked beside the humans, clearing the battlefield, dragging enemy machines into piles, burying the dead, both theirs and the enemy's. The fire had died, but the memories were still hot inside every soul who survived. Even the children moved with a strange new silence, as if they had aged 100 years overnight. Briggs stood on the edge of the village, staring into the forest, his metal hand resting on the hilt of his blade. Reno came up beside him, carrying a wounded bird in his hand, its wing broken. But eyes alert. He fought better this time, Reno said, without pride or mockery, just a quiet truth. Briggs nodded, not taking his eyes off the tree. Spain is the best teacher. In the center of the village, the elders gathered around a small table, made from old crates, their faces grim, but not hopeless. The oldest among them, a wise female named Shay, looked toward the humans, who were now repairing weapons and checking traps I used to think humans were nothing but beasts," she said gently. Now I do not know what to think. Beside her, a young mother, Aaliyah, held her daughter, watching as the girl helped Reno clean the bird. "They are beasts," she whispered, "but beasts with hearts." That night, as the stars rose higher than before, the humans sat by a small fire, telling stories for the first time, not to scare or impress, but to remember. Briggs spoke of the war on Earth, where cities crumbled and leaders lied, and those who fought were thrown away when peace became inconvenient, who were made to do what others would not, he said slowly, "and when they had no more use for us, they erased us from the maps." A villager asked why they still fought. "Because someone has told." Next morning, the humans began something new. They took the strongest villagers deep into the forest to an old bunker hidden beneath vines and roots. Inside were weapons, old tech maps of forgotten battles. "This is where we teach," Briggs said. The bunker became a school, a forge, a place where the past and the future collided in sweat and steel. The villagers learned more than fighting. They learned how to think like predators, how to read movement, how to feel danger. Leaf was among them, quick and sharp, with eyes that saw what others missed. She asked Briggs one day why he looked at the stars. "So if 10 answered, because I am waiting for something worse." Reno, meanwhile, trained Gino in tracking, teaching him how to move like a shadow, how to kill without sound, but also how to walk away when it mattered not. "Every threat needs blood," he said. "Sometimes silence is louder." Days passed, then weeks, and the enemy did not return. But the humans never rested, never trusted. Quietone night. While the village slept, a sound broke the stillness, a low hum, not from the sky but from the ground. The humans woke instantly, weapons in hand. They followed the sound to the old hills where a strange ship had landed, not enemy, not human, but marked with symbols from Earth. They approached carefully and were met with soldiers in clean armor, their faces smooth, their hands unscarred. The leader stepped forward and smiled. "You are a long way from home." Briggs narrowed his eyes. "So Aryao came to help," the man said, but his voice held no warmth, only calculation. "You are trespassing on a restricted zone. This planet is under negotiation." Briggs laughed, a cold, broken sound. "You mean it is being sold?" The man said, "Nothing can offer safety for you and your pets." He motioned to the villagers who stood behind the humans, watching. With narrowed eyes, one of the soldiers stepped too close, and Reno moved like lightning, slamming him to the ground with a knife at his throat. It was a warning. The leader raised a handpiece. "We are not enemies." Briggs stared him down. "Then why did you bring mercenaries wearing human faces?" Behind the ship, figures stepped out, faces too smooth, to perfect, bodies enhanced not with scars, but with artificial parts built to mimic humans, but lacking their souls. Synthetic soldiers. They had no smell, no breath, just movement. Briggs turned to the villagers. "These are not your friend?" Gino asked softly. The human. Briggs looked into the empty eyes of the synthetics. "No, they are what humans become when they forget pain." A sudden attack came, fast and precise. The synthetics moved like machines. Because they struck without mercy, but the humans had faced worse. Briggs took a hit to the shoulder and kept moving. Reno shot through the eyes of one fake soldier. Aaliyah shielded her daughter, while Leaf picked up a blade and fought back. It was chaos. Fire, screams, metal against metal, but in the end, the synthetics fell lifeless, their circuits hissing into silence. The leader of the mercenaries crawled backward. "You could have had peace." Briggs stood over him, bleeding, but steady. "You never had peace, only the choice of who we bleed for." Turn to the villagers. "You are not our mission. You are our reason." That night, the villagers gathered around the humans, not as protectors or monsters, but as equals. They had bled together, and something stronger than fear had formed between them, something that could not be explained, only livid. And far above, the stars shimmered quietly, as if watching. The air was thick with smoke and dust as the villagers tried to process what had just happened. The fake humans had bled, sparks and wires, not blood and flesh, and it left a strange feeling inside everyone, a cold reminder that not all things with a face are alive, and not all alive things have mercy. Briggs stood in the center of the wreckage, staring at the torn bodies of the synthetics, his jaw clenched, his eyes heavy with memory. Leaf stood beside him, gripping a blade stained with oil, and her hand was trembling, not with fear, but with something worse, confusion. "Am I like you now?" she asked softly. Briggs looked down at her, then knelt slow and steady. "You are like you always were, stronger than you know, but not broken." She did not answer, just stared at the blade in her hand, and then dropped it into the dirt. In the distance, a sharp beep echoed through the forest, then another, then 3 more. A signal had been triggered. Someone had called, someone was coming, and it would not be good. Reno sprinted toward Briggs, holding a blinking device. "Tripped a beacon when we fought the synthetics. Someone else heard it, and they are close." "How close?" Briggs asked. "Too close," Reno answered. The village had no time to rest. The humans moved fast, organizing the villagers, positioning them, assigning watches, and preparing fallback points. The forest once again became a maze, of hidden traps and fortified pots. The bunker became a last stand chamber, but something worse was already unfolding. Gunk to Briggs and the others, someone inside the village had already made contact with the enemy. Before the battle, a soft voice in the shadows, a promise of safety in exchange for coordinates and silence. His name was Velen, a former traitor who lost everything during the first attack: his farm, his family, his dignity. Now all he had left was survival, and when a voice whispered to him through a stolen transmitter, he listened to. Can protect you, the voice said. Who can restore your status? Just tell us where the humans sleep. Velen agreed and sent the signal. The next night, while the stars were hidden behind clouds, a new wave of enemies landed, not like before, not loud, not clumsy, but silent, efficient, and precise. They moved like water slipping through the cracks, avoiding the traps, using codes only an insider could provide. They went straight for the humans. The first to fall was Nox, the quiet one with the burned face, ambushed in his sleep. No scream, no fight, just silence. The second was Vera, the woman with the skull tattoo. She went down, hard blades in both hands, taking two attackers with her. Before falling, her body found beside the bunker doors, eyes open, still burning. Briggs woke to the sound of Aaliyah screaming, the firelight flickering across her face as she held her daughter, who had been nearly taken but fought back with teeth and nails. Reno stormed into the bunker, blood pouring from a wound in his sidu. Heva traitor. The words hit harder than bullets. Briggs gathered what was left of the team and the strongest villagers and moved to secure the children. When this now they hunted through the village like wolves, not for enemies but for betrayal. It was Leaf who found Velen cowering near the edge of the forest, holding the transmitter in his shaking hand. She did not speak, just stared at him, her eyes full of something too old for her face. He dropped the device and fell to his knees. He wanted to live, he cried. Briggs arrived moments later and said nothing. He looked at Velen, then at Leaf. Do you want him gone? If not dead. Briggs handed her a blade. Your choice. She stared at it, then threw it down and walked away. Briggs looked at Velen and whispered, that was mercy. Remember it, because no one else will give it again. The next day, the villagers buried their dead next to the humans. Vera and Nox were laid beside the elders of the village. Flowers placed on their armor, small toys set at their feet by the children. They fought for us, Gino said aloud, and we will not forget. Briggs stood at the back of the crowd, his face blank, his body still, but inside his soul felt heavier than ever. The people they came to save were becoming warriors, and the warriors he came with were becoming memorious. Later that night, Briggs sat alone near the ruins of the bunker. Reno joined him, his wound bandaged but still bleeding beneath. Who cannot survive another hit like that, Reno said. Briggs nodded. They will send more and worse next time. Then we take the fight to them, Reno whispered. Briggs looked at him. Are you ready to do? Reno smiled, the first real smile in days. He died the day they erased us. Everything since has been extra. They both stood and walked back to the village, where the children were playing under the stars and the elders were telling stories, and the fire still burned, but far beyond the trees in the dark sky a massive shadow was moving, a mothership the size of a mountain, heading straight for the man. This time no forest or trap would be enough. Sky began to bleed light as the mothership pushed through the clouds, its massive frame covering the sun like a beast made of steel and silence. The ground trembled, and the villagers looked up with eyes wide and full of something deeper than fear, something like knowing that death was coming, and it wore armor the size of mountains. Briggs stood at the edge of the village, his metal hand clenched, his jaw locked, his heart heavy. He had seen ships like this before, once on a battlefield where friends vanished under fire. That sounded like thunder, and rained blue. Ferrano came beside him holding a long rifle modified with alien tech wrapped in cloth and tape. His face was pale, but his stance firm. We are not walking away from this one. Our Briggs did not answer. Instead, he turned to the villagers who were now gathering, forming lines, holding spears, traps, wires, blades, anything make this cost them. He pointed toward the hills, where the forest grew thick. Evacuate the children, move them underground to the caves. We mapped 2 weeks ago. Aaliyah grabbed her daughter and ran with a group of mothers and elders. Leaf held a small blade in one hand and a slingshot in the other, her eyes scanning the sky. The rest of the village stayed and prepared in the old bunker. Briggs and Reno went over the last plans, maps drawn in blood, dirt, and charcoal, split into 2 teams. One stays here to protect the core, the other leads the enemy into the northern valley, where the traps are hidden. While leads the bait? Reno asked, though he already knew. Briggs smiled. Without smiling, Guido. Reno nodded, then tossed Briggs a pendant for luck. Do not believe in luck, neither do I. When the enemy dropped, it was not like before. They came from the sky and the ground, from hidden tunnels and invisible doors. They moved like machines, but these were not synthetics. They were something worse, enhanced with flesh, twisted by tech, silent and cold. Briggs led his team straight into them, roaring like a beast. his voice breaking the silence of war. His team followed, villagers screaming defiance, charging with nothing but rage in their hands and hope in their hearts. The battle was brutal, the traps worked only once. And then the enemy adapted, they began tearing through defenses like paper. But the humans fought with something deeper than tactics, they fought with memory. With loss, with a fire that could not be programmed. Reno and his team defended the bunker. Each step backward measured, each breath calculated. Vera had taught him how to fight. But grief had taught him how to endure. Yino was beside him using a bow crafted from old ship parts, each arrow finding a mark, each shot a prayer inside the caves. Elia held the children close, her hands shaking, but her voice steady. They will come back. They always come back. Leaf stood near the entrance, her eyes never leaving the dark path ahead, her small frame still, her fingers tight on the grip of her weapon bit. Deep inside the forest something shifted, a sound like thunder, but slower, heavier. The mothership had landed fully, and it opened its heart from inside. Walked a figure, not in armor, not with weapons, but cloaked in white. Surrounded by guards made of light and bone, the commander walked into the battle calm, untouched, and raised a hand. Stop! The enemy froze, the villagers staggered, and Briggs looked up from a broken hill, blood on his face, his arm hanging limp. Commander Smoletti, admire your spirit, human, but this world belongs to us. It was written in the stars before you were born. Briggs stood breathing hard, his body shaking, but his voice steady. Then the stars were wrong. The commander laughed, then pointed toward the bunker. We want the core of your machine, the thing you stole years ago. Give it, and we will spare the rest. Briggs looked toward Reno, then back at the enemy. You want it? Come. Take it. Commander gave a nod, and the final wave began, but they did not know what waited in the mountain. Past villagers had hidden explosives and old mining shafts. They had rigged the cliffs with fire. Briggs stood at the final ridge holding the trigger, his team already gone, his body broken, his heart steady. Reno looked toward the mountain from the bunker and saw the signal, a single flare, green and bright. The mountain roared as the explosives went off, the cliffs collapsed, the enemy forces crushed under rock and Freth. Shockwave silenced the battlefield. The commander thrown back, his guards shattered. Briggs was gone. The silence after was louder than the war. The enemy ships began to retreat, the mothership lifting slowly, the damage too great. The will broken in the village, the remaining villagers and humans stood together watching the sky as it cleared. Reno dropped his rifle and fell to his knees. Did it? Leaf walked up beside him and placed a small flower on the dirt, saved using far beneath the mountain in a cave untouched by fire. A single light blinked on a message, sent a whisper across the stars. Only the killer humans came to the rescue. Smoke still lingered in the air as the villagers picked through the ruins of what once was their home. Though the enemy had retreated, the cost was carved into every shattered wall, every burned tree, and every empty space. Where someone once stood, the mountain that had shielded them was now a scar on the land, and beneath it was the man who gave everything. Briggs, the killer, the protector, the one who never looked away from war and never ran from duty. Reno sat on a broken ledge overlooking the wreckage, his hands wrapped in bloodied cloth, his eyes red not from smoke but from memory. Leaf sat beside him, quiet and still, a child shaped by war, her blade now resting in a sling over her back. Will they come back? She asked, her voice small but sharp. They always do, Reno replied, but we will be ready. Below them the villagers had formed a new kind of order, not the quiet peaceful lives they once knew, but something forged from fire and loss. They built with speed and precision, following human patterns, learning to defend without forgetting what they had fought to keep. Gino trained the youngest how to run without sound, how to strike when cornered, how to listen when the wind changed. He had grown in weeks what others might not grow in years. In the center of the village stood a new monument, not made of gold or crystal, but of steel, bones, weapons, and the old armor of Briggs, placed in silence on a platform surrounded by stones. From the mountain, children placed flowers at its feet, each one carved with the name of those who had fallen or alive. Because he stood, Reno said during the first gathering, he stood when no one else did. He bled so we would not. And when the mountain asked for a soul, he gave it without a word. Aaliyah stood with her daughter hand in hand, her eyes on the stars and her thoughts heavy. We're nothing to the galaxy, she whispered, and still they came for us. The ones called killers. The elders now walked among the people, not giving orders, but listening, asking, learning, for they had seen what leadership meant, and it came not from titles, but from sacrifice. Morning, a strange signal reached the edge of the village. A ship descending, not fast, not hostile, just drifting with slow, careful intent. The villagers armed themselves, standing at every edge of the crater, but Reno raised a hand. The ship landed, and from it stepped a small crew, not enemy, not synthetic, not armored. Instead, they wore simple suits and carried only tools and books. Scientists from another world, drawn by the pulse of what had happened here, who came to Learn not to take, they said. We heard the scream of the mountain Renault. Met them at the edge of the crater, his rifle slung. But ready you can stay, but you follow our rules. And you walk among graves before you speak of Data, the leader of the crew. A quiet, older woman with eyes like stone nodded, ones who came to understand, not to claim it. So they were allowed to walk among the ruins, to listen to the stories told by Leaf, by Gino, by the mothers and fathers who now held weapons in one hand and hope in the other. In time more came, not to fight, but to honor traders, who brought seeds to plant, engineers, who offered better shelters. Even other species who had once feared humans now came to thank them. They called the place the Crater of Mercy, but the humans never forgot what they were. They never softened, they never rested. Drano became the watchtower, walking the edge of the village each night, speaking to no one, listening to the stars. Leaf grew older faster than she should, training others, drawing maps, marking danger, writing history in blood and chalk. Gino took up the mantle of teacher, showing the next generation how to fight with honor, how to fall without fear. And always in the center of the village, the armor of Briggs stood, watching, silent, unmovable. Years passed, and the story spread across the systems, told in whispers in dark corners, in war rooms and quiet homes. They say when no one else came, the killers. Did they say the killers built peace from rebel? They say one man stood before a mountain and made it bow. One day a young boy born after the war stood before the monument and asked, Renower, they really killers? Reno looked down at the boy, then at the armor, then at the village, now full of life and scarcity. Were what the world made them, and they became what the world needed. The boy did not understand, not fully, but he nodded anyway. And one day, maybe he would. The wind moved softly through the trees that had once been charred and broken, now tall again, though marked with old scars. The village had changed, but not forgotten, its shape rebuilt by hands that once trembled with fear, now steady with memory and purpose. In the center, where the ground still held the weight of a crater, a statue stood, not perfect, not polished, but built from pieces of armor, burnt stone, and shattered steel. At its feet were blades dulled by time, tools used by hands once called monstrous, and toys carved by children born after the battle. The world had come to know the story of this place, of the mountain that screamed of the killers who came not to conquer, but to protect, of the man named Briggs, who became more than a ghost, more than a soldier. Leaf stood before the statue, her hands behind her back, a small book in her hand, worn and folded, filled with sketches and words she had written since she was a child. Words she could never speak when the humans first arrived, words that now carried the weight of generations. Reno approached from behind, his steps slow, his beard gray, now his eyes sharp as ever. In his hand he held a bundle wrapped in cloth, tied with black string. It is today, then he said, and Leaf nodded. Said the memorial was not a holiday, it was not a celebration, it was a reminder. The entire village gathered in silence, even the children, even the newcomers who had never heard a scream or seen an enemy, even the off-worlders who now traded and taught and built alongside them. Leaf opened her book and read aloud, her voice even and steady, though her hands trembled just slightly. Came with blood on his hands and fire in his heart. He did not ask for thanks, he did not ask for love, he asked only to fight for the forgotten. Her voice grew louder as the people listened. Stood when the sky fell, he did not run, he did not break, he gave everything to those who once feared him. She closed the book and placed it at the base of the statue, where other books lay, where drawings made by children fluttered in the wind. Reno stepped forward and unwrapped the cloth, revealing a single metal plate from the old armor of Briggs. It still held scratches from the final battle and dried blood that no one dared clean. He placed it beside the statue, then stepped back. Would have hated all this, Reno said with a small smile, but he would have stood here anyway, just in case. After the memorial, the villagers returned to their work, to their studies, and their training for peace was never a promise, only a chance, and they would not be caught blind again. Leaf walked the edge of the forest, her boots silent on the soft ground, her eyes scanning the sky. Though she knew nothing waited there, not today, not yet. Gino found her near the old bunker, now turned into a library and training hall, where weapons lined one wall and books lined the other. You ready for the talk, he asked. She glanced at him, then nodded. They entered the hall, where young ones waited, seated in silence, eager, eyes wide open, weapons beside them, but untouched. Leaf stood before them and began, years ago, when this place was ash and we were shadows, there were 5 humans who came. We called them killers, but they became something else, something more, and because of them we learned to fight, not with rage, but with purpose. Sesh told them the story, not with fire, not with tears, but with quiet truth of fear and betrayal and sacrifice of death, that bought time of pain, that gave birth to Hopion of the youngest. A sked where you scared. Leaf paused, then Sadie's every day, and still I picked up the blad of the train, the new ones, with patience, with honesty. They did not teach them to hate, but to see, to understand. That strength means protecting those who cannot. Raise a hand. Later that evening, Reno sat on the roof of the old command post. Watching the stars, Leaf joined him. Two mugs in her hand, she handed him one. And they sat in silence for a while. Would be proud of you, Reno said quietly. No, she replied. He would be proud of you. Above them the stars blinked like memorias. Reno looked at her. And Esqueto, you think the galaxy has changed? Leaf sipped her drink. Then nodded. Not yet, but it will, because now it knows that when the screams go unheard, when the weak are forgotten, when the fire is too strong and hope is fading, there are still those who will come, and sometimes the ones who come are the ones you fear most, because only the killer humans came to the rescue, and the galaxy would never forget them again. The stars were quiet above the village, as if listening, as if remembering what had happened in this once forgotten place where ash had become soil and fear had become fire. Leaf stood at the edge of the forest where the trees bent slightly, as if still bowing to the man who had once stood there, his blade drawn, his eyes cold, his heart full. She looked up at the sky, the same sky that once rained fire, now calm, holding the weight of stories told in whispers across worlds. Reno joined her, his steps slower than they once were, but steady as ever. He carried with him a piece of stone from the mountain edge, cracked and dark, the same stone that had buried the enemy, the same stone that had hidden the last heartbeat of Briggs. They walked together in silence toward the center of the village, where the statue waited, not a monument of pride, but of memory. The crowd was already gathered, old faces and new eyes filled with questions, with hope, with purpose. Leaf stepped forward, holding a new book, one she had written over years, filled not just with war and death, but with what came after, with rebuilding, with learning, with healing. She opened the book and read the final page, her voice soft but unwavering. There are places in the galaxy that shine bright with power, with technology, with knowledge, but there are few that shine because someone chose to stand when they could have walked away, because someone chose to fight, not for glory, not for reward, but for the voices that no one else could. Hirsch closed the book and placed it on the stone, her fingers lingering for a moment. Treno stepped forward and placed the cracked piece of mountain beside it, then turned to the crowd. Was called a killer, he was called a monster, but here he became something more. He became a shield, and in doing so, he taught us to become. The Samoth wind moved through the village, soft and cool, carrying the smell of stone and earth and fire. Not the fire of destruction, but the fire of rebirth. Children ran past, laughing, with wooden blades in hand, pretending to be protectors, pretending to be humans. In the training hall, new maps were being drawn, not of war, but of stars, to explore trade routes, to share knowledge, to grow. In the library, Gino recorded the names of every soul who stood in the final battle, every villager, every human, every life that became part of the story. And on the edge of the crater where the first signal had been sent, where Gino once whispered for help into broken static, a new beacon was built, not to beg for rescue, but to offer it. Its light pulsed across the stars, a signal to all who listened: you are not alone, you will stand with Yount if the galaxy forgets again, if the silence returns, if the fire comes back. Then somewhere out there someone will answer, and maybe, just maybe, they will be human. End.